It had all started so innocently. David, my son, had invited me over to his house for dinner to catch up. After all, we hadn't spent much time together lately. He had recently gotten married, and life had been moving quickly for him. I was excited to see him, and even more so to meet his new wife, Sophie. David had always been a bit of a mama's boy, but I knew that marriage often brings changes, and I was eager to see how things were for him now that he was building a life with someone else. Sophie was an ambitious woman, confident and self-assured, in a way that I hadn't always seen in women of her age. I was a little apprehensive because, as much as David adored her, something about Sophie made me feel uneasy. She had that certain look, that air of superiority that suggested she saw herself as above others. But I chalked it up to my own insecurities after all. I was David's mother, and maybe I was just having trouble adjusting to the new dynamic. The dinner invitation seemed like the perfect chance to smooth things over, make small talk, and get to know her better. So, when the day arrived, I put on my nicest dress, grabbed a bottle of wine, and headed to their home. It was a lovely house, well decorated, stylish but not over the top, very much in line with Sophie's personality, I imagined. She had a way about her that screamed success, and I knew from our previous conversations that she worked hard in her career. Still, despite the outward appearance of ease, there was always something that bothered me beneath the surface. When I arrived, I was greeted warmly by David, who gave me a big hug. He looked so happy. But Sophie... Well, Sophie greeted me with a tight smile and a brief nod. It wasn't unfriendly, but it wasn't welcoming either. I brushed it off. It was probably just nerves. She was still getting used to having me around, right? Sophie showed me to the dining room, where the table was set beautifully with a candle in the middle, and an array of what I assumed were her favorite dishes. There was something about her in that moment, her confidence, her polished demeanor, that made me feel small, like I didn't quite belong. It wasn't that she said anything overtly rude. It was just the way she carried herself, the subtle looks, the way she spoke to me as if I were a little out of touch, old-fashioned. I tried my best to remain calm and pleasant. After all, I had been invited here to share a meal with them, and I wasn't going to let anything spoil the night. The evening started innocently enough. David made small talk, asking about how things were going at work, and we discussed family matters. Sophie, though, was quick to steer the conversation back to her own life. She talked about how her career was flourishing, how she had just landed a major contract for the company she worked for, and how she had bought a new car because she could finally afford it. She spoke with such self-assurance that it almost felt like she was showing off, making it clear that she had arrived at a place where she was in control of her own success. As she talked, I noticed David's gaze shifting back and forth between the two of us. His eyes softened when he looked at me, as if he was trying to gauge my reaction. I could tell he was enjoying seeing us interact, but there was something in the air that felt tense, as if there were an invisible barrier between Sophie and me. Sophie's tone was polite, but there was an undercurrent of something else, something I couldn't quite place. Every now and then, she would glance at me, as if sizing me up, and it made me uncomfortable. I'd been married for years, raised David on my own after his father passed, and worked hard to make sure my family was always well provided for. Yet, here I was, being made to feel like I didn't quite measure up to her standards. The tension was subtle but palpable. I could feel myself shrinking under Sophie's careful scrutiny, and I began to wonder if I was imagining it. Had I really been projecting my insecurities? Maybe I was reading too much into it. After all, she was probably just nervous about having her mother-in-law over for the first time. But then, as the evening wore on, I began to notice something more troubling. It wasn't just the way Sophie spoke about her accomplishments, or the way she talked over me when I tried to share my thoughts. It was her passive-aggressive comments that started to grate on me. Sophie made a remark about how I still preferred to live in the old-fashioned way, meaning I didn't embrace all the technology and gadgets that she seemed so enamored with. You know, she said, almost condescendingly, maybe it's time to get with the times. The world is changing, and it's hard to stay ahead when you're stuck in the past. I smiled, but I could feel my cheeks burning. Stuck in the past? I hadn't asked for this. I had always tried to be open-minded, but Sophie's comments made me feel like I wasn't even trying. It wasn't the first time she had made a remark like this. A few months ago, she had suggested that I update my wardrobe because I still wore what she called old lady clothes. I hadn't said anything then, but tonight, the comment stung a little more. She was talking about my life, my choices, my home, as if she had the right to dictate how I lived. David seemed to sense the shift in my mood, and he quickly changed the subject. But Sophie wasn't finished yet. She was like a dog with a bone, circling back to her favorite topic, how she was doing so well in her career. It's just so much easier now, you know? You don't have to struggle the way our parents did. Things are at our fingertips, everything is so accessible now. I nodded along, but in my mind I was bristling. Sophie had no idea how hard I had worked to get to where I was. I may not have had the latest gadgets or the flashiest career, but I was proud of my achievements. I had built my own business from the ground up and had put in countless hours of hard work to make sure I was financially independent. As the evening wore on, the discomfort grew. The atmosphere in the room felt heavy, like a storm cloud hanging just overhead, and I could feel my patience beginning to wear thin. By the time dinner was finishing, I could tell Sophie was getting more comfortable, more confident in her role as the dominant figure in this household. But when dessert was served, something shifted. Sophie, leaning back in her chair, threw me a look that I could only describe as a mix of condescension and irritation. She smiled tightly and, in an almost mocking tone, said, "I just don't understand why people our age don't know when to step aside. I mean, some of us are stuck in the past, relying on our children for support, as if that's the best way to live." The words hit me like a slap across the face. I sat there, stunned, processing what she had just said. The audacity of her comments stung deeply. Relying on my children for support. Was she calling me a burden? I had never, not once, asked David for money or for anything beyond what was reasonable. But there it was. Sophie had just called me a beggar, and I couldn't believe it. I had always believed that family was about mutual respect and support. I had raised David with that principle in mind. Yet, here was Sophie, dismissing me like I was just another charity case in her world. The hurt was immediate, but I refused to let it show on my face. I took a slow breath, feeling my heart race. Sophie's eyes were locked on mine, a smirk playing on her lips. But little did she know that I was far from the weak, helpless woman. She thought I was Dot. It was time for me to stand up for myself and show her just how wrong she was. The moment Sophie's words landed, the room seemed to shrink, and my heart pounded in my chest. I hadn't expected her to come out and say it so bluntly, so openly, but there it was. Her assumption that I was some kind of beggar, living off my son's generosity, as if I had nothing to my name. It was a blow, and it felt personal. It wasn't just a simple misunderstanding, it was a judgment of my life, my worth, and everything I had worked for. For a few seconds, I sat frozen at the dinner table, the sting of her comments still echoing in my ears. I could feel my face growing hot, but I refused to let my emotions overtake me. No matter how deeply her words cut, I wasn't going to let Sophie see how much it hurt. I could feel my son's eyes on me, watching carefully, sensing the tension in the air. but I wasn't going to address it right away. Not yet. I excused myself from the table, needing a moment to gather my thoughts. I needed space to breathe, to figure out how I was going to handle this. I stepped into the quiet hallway, feeling the weight of the silence around me. The more I stood there, the more I realized how much I had let Sophie's subtle dismissals slide over the past year. She had always been just a little too condescending, a little too dismissive of who I was and what I had accomplished. I had told myself it was just nerves. Or maybe I was imagining it. But this was different. This was her making a blatant assumption about me, about my life. And I wasn't going to let it stand. It wasn't just about defending myself. It was about showing my son and Sophie that I wasn't some old woman stuck in the past. I had worked hard my entire life to build the business that I had. I had sacrificed, struggled, and worked long hours to make sure I provided for my family. I didn't need Sophie to remind me that the world had changed. I knew it. I had adapted. Just in my own way. When I returned to the dining room, Sophie was still seated at the table, looking oblivious to the storm she had just unleashed. David was looking at me, his expression a mixture of concern and confusion. I could see that he didn't fully understand the tension between Sophie and me, but he was trying to read the situation. I sat down slowly, took a deep breath, and finally met Sophie's gaze. Her smile faltered just a little, sensing the shift in my demeanor. "You know, Sophie," I began, keeping my tone calm and measured, "what you said just now really bothers me." Her eyes narrowed slightly, and for the first time, I saw her mask of confidence slip just a little. "I didn't mean to offend you," she said, but the words were hollow. She hadn't meant to offend me, but that didn't mean she didn't mean what she said. I shook my head slowly, making sure to keep my voice steady. "No, Sophie. You didn't offend me. You judged me. You assumed that I was just sitting around, waiting for someone to take care of me. You called me a beggar, and you don't know a damn thing about me." There was a silence in the room then. David's eyes flicked from me to Sophie, and I could see the realization dawning in his eyes. He hadn't known what had been going on behind the scenes. He didn't know that I had been swallowing my pride every time Sophie made a remark that cut a little too deep. Sophie shifted in her seat, clearly uncomfortable. I didn't mean it like that," she said, her voice unsteady. "I didn't mean it like that." "You were making a point," I said firmly. "But it wasn't about me needing help. It was about you thinking you have the right to judge my life, my decisions, and the way I live. And that's what's unacceptable." I paused for a moment, letting my words sink in. David looked at me, his face a mix of concern and confusion. He had always been the peacekeeper, the one who tried to smooth over the rough edges between me and Sophie. But this time, he was seeing a side of me he hadn't fully understood before. I wasn't just his mother anymore. I was a woman who had worked tirelessly to build a life for herself, and I wasn't going to let anyone, not even his wife, undermine that. Sophie, looking more uncomfortable by the second, started to open her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. "Sophie, I've worked my entire life for what I have. I own my own company. I'm not sitting around, waiting for my son to take care of me. I built something that I'm proud of, and I don't need anyone's charity. And I certainly don't need you to tell me how to live my life." Her eyes widened, and for the first time that evening, I saw genuine shock on her face. She had no idea. She had been so wrapped up in her own world, so focused on her own accomplishments, that she never took the time to even ask me about my life. She had no idea who I was, what I had built, and what I had worked for. "I didn't know," she finally said, her voice quiet, almost apologetic. "I'm sorry. I nodded, but I didn't smile. You didn't know because you never bothered to ask. You assumed, and that's where you went wrong. I'm not some charity case, Sophie. I'm not looking for handouts. I'm not looking for your pity. I've earned everything I have, and I've done it on my own. There was a long pause. Sophie didn't speak, and David just watched us both, his eyes wide as he processed everything. He had always known I was independent, but I don't think he realized just how hard I had fought for everything I had. Finally, David spoke, his voice a little shaky. Mum, I didn't know she said that. I'm sorry. I should have been paying more attention. I turned to him, my face softening. It's not your fault, David, but this is something I had to handle. I'm your mother, and you need to understand that I'm not someone who just takes what's handed to me. I've worked hard to get where I am. Sophie, her face now pale, with embarrassment, stood up and walked around the table. I'm sorry, she repeated, her voice genuine this time. I really didn't mean to hurt you. I just ... I don't know. I've always been so focused on what I've been doing that I didn't think about how my words might come across. I stood up as well, my posture strong but not unkind. It's important to think before you speak, Sophie. If you want to be part of this family, you need to understand who you're talking to. I'm not someone you can just dismiss because I'm older, or because you think I don't know how to keep up. I've done more than you can imagine, and I won't be disrespected. For a long moment no one spoke. It felt like the air had cleared, but there was still a lot of tension between Sophie and me. I knew it would take time for her to adjust, to understand that she couldn't just waltz into my life and make assumptions. But I was determined to stand my ground. I had fought too hard for what I had, and I wasn't about to let anyone, especially not Sophie, undermine me. She would have to respect that, whether she wanted to or not. As I gathered my things to leave, David came over to me, pulling me into a hug. I'm sorry, Mom. I had no idea she was acting like that. I squeezed him back, my voice steady. It's okay, David, but you need to understand that I'm not someone to be pushed around. I'm your mother, and I've earned my place in this family. David nodded, and Sophie stood awkwardly by the door, clearly uncomfortable but also realizing the weight of what had just happened. As I left their home that night, I felt a sense of empowerment, knowing that I had stood up for myself when it mattered the most. After the tension-filled dinner, I left David and Sophie's home feeling a mixture of relief and exhaustion. Sophie had apologized, but I could see the discomfort in her eyes. The realization had clearly hit her. She had overstepped, misjudged me, and she knew it. I wasn't about to let her off the hook so easily, but I wasn't going to continue to let her undermining behavior slide either. It wasn't just about her underestimating me. It was about my son, David, and how the entire situation was affecting the family dynamics. That night, as I reflected on everything that had unfolded, I realized I had made a choice that could change the course of my relationship with my son and his wife. I wasn't going to be a passive participant in their lives anymore. I had been swallowing too much for too long, letting the sharp edge of Sophie's remarks cut me deeper than I had ever acknowledged. I had stood up for myself at dinner, but there was still a bigger issue at play: the environment Sophie and I were creating in David's home. It became clear to me that things couldn't go on this way. I wasn't going to tolerate being treated like a guest in my own family. I needed to make it clear that I deserved respect, and that if they weren't willing to give me that, I would step back from the situation entirely. I had to make the hardest decision of my life. I had to draw a line in the sand, for the sake of my dignity and my peace of mind. The next morning, I called David. My voice was calm, but there was an underlying firmness to it that I knew he would recognize. David, we need to talk, I said, trying to keep my emotions in check. I've been thinking about everything that happened last night, and frankly, I've had enough. There was a long pause before David responded. His voice tentative. "Mum, what are you talking about? I thought we cleared things up last night." "We did," I replied, my tone steady but not soft. "But this isn't just about last night, David. This is about the way I've been treated in your house. I'm tired of being dismissed. Tired of being made to feel like I'm beneath you both." There was another pause, and I could hear the sound of David shifting in his chair. "What do you mean, Mum?" I thought everything was okay now. Sophie apologized, and "It's not just about an apology, David," I interrupted, my voice gaining strength. "It's about respect. I've spent my whole life working hard, building something for myself, and I'm not going to sit here and let Sophie treat me like I'm some kind of charity case. I don't need your pity or your handouts. I've never needed them." David's voice softened, but I could hear the hesitation in it. "Mum, I never meant to make you feel like that. I don't know what else to say." I took a deep breath. "David, this isn't just about Sophie. It's about both of you. I'm your mother, and I deserve respect just like anyone else in your life. I've been nothing but supportive of you both, and I've made sacrifices. But I will not continue to put myself in a situation where I am made to feel small. This is your home. Yes, but it's also my family. And I am done tolerating being treated like I don't belong." David was quiet for a long time. I could tell he was processing everything I had said. "So what are you saying, Mum?" he finally asked. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what I was about to say. "I'm saying that I can't keep coming around if the situation isn't going to change. If Sophie doesn't respect me, then I won't be a part of it. I love you, David, but I won't tolerate this dynamic any longer." There was a silence on the other end of the line, and I could hear David's breathing, steady but tense. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet, filled with uncertainty. "Mom, I don't want you to feel this way, but I also don't know how to fix things. Sophie and I, we don't always see eye to eye, and I don't know what to do." "That's not for me to fix, David," I replied, my voice firm but compassionate. "I've done my part. I've raised you to be independent and strong, to know what respect means. Now it's time for you to decide how you want to handle this. I won't be the one who keeps sacrificing for the sake of peace." David sighed heavily. "I understand, I don't want to lose you, Mom." "You're not going to lose me, David," I said softly. "But you need to learn that love isn't about tolerating disrespect. It's about standing up for what's right. And right now I'm standing up for myself." The decision after hanging up the phone, I felt a mix of relief and anxiety. I knew this conversation was a turning point, not just for David and me, but for the family dynamic as a whole. I wasn't sure how Sophie would react, or if David would truly understand the gravity of what I was saying, but I had done what I needed to do. The decision was final. I wasn't going to continue putting myself in a position where I felt inferior, where my worth was questioned, where my voice was ignored. No one had the right to treat me like that, not even my own family. If it meant stepping away to protect myself and my dignity, then so be it. A few days later, I received a message from David, asking to meet. I agreed to meet him at a local cafe, and when I arrived, I saw him sitting at a table, looking weary. He stood up when he saw me, and we exchanged a hug, though it felt somewhat stiff. We both knew that things had changed. "I've been thinking about what you said, Mom," David began, his voice quiet but serious. "And I get it now. I see it. Sophie and I both. We've been treating you like you're just a guest, like you're not part of the family. That's not right. I'm sorry." I looked at him, my heart heavy with emotion. "David, it's not just about the apology. It's about respect. It's about acknowledging that I've worked hard for everything I have, And I'm not asking for special treatment. I just want to be treated with the same respect you'd give to anyone else. He nodded, his eyes sincere. I get it, Mom, I really do. I've talked to Sophie about everything, and she's starting to see it too. We've both been, I don't know, maybe a little too caught up in our own lives. But that doesn't mean you should be made to feel like you don't matter. I smiled, a small but genuine smile. I'm glad you're seeing it now, David. I'm not asking for anything other than respect. I'm still your mother, and I'll always love you. But that doesn't mean I'll tolerate being treated like an outsider. David reached out and took my hand across the table. We'll fix this, Mom, I promise. We're going to make it right. The resolution over the next few weeks, things began to shift. Sophie and I didn't immediately become best friends, but we slowly started to find common ground. I set clear boundaries, and Sophie, to her credit, began to respect them. She apologized more than once, and while I didn't expect an immediate change, I began to see genuine effort on her part. David, too, seemed to understand what had been at stake. He respected the fact that I was no longer willing to let things slide and began to communicate with me in a way that made me feel valued. We talked more openly, and it became clear that while we didn't always agree, there was mutual respect. It wasn't an overnight fix. Relationships don't just heal because one conversation happens. But I felt stronger, more empowered. I had stood up for myself, and in doing so, I had not only reclaimed my place within my own family, but also reminded David and Sophie what it meant to truly respect one another.